Hey, hi there. Welcome back to Duel Citizen on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland. Saturday, April 20th. Got a really special guest on here tonight. We got Dave Allison from Custom Made Music in Virginia. So Dave's going to talk a little bit about his record label. But also Dave, the first time that I've seen, I've been following Custom Made Music for a few years now. Dave's going on tour on his own. So why don't you tell us first a bit about Custom Made Music, and then we'll talk about the tour you're about to head on.
I started Custom Made Music in 2007. I'd actually been taking a little break from releasing records at the time, and actually my friend Corey Manning, who was in a band called The Riot before, and he toured the world actually. They were starting out in a Richmond band, Richmond, Virginia, and I'd known him a long time, and his band wanted to go on tour and make a career out of it, and he said, hey, will you release this record for us? And I was like, I'm kind of taking a break from doing records, and I had a few other musical projects at the time, and he just kept pushing me to do it, and then I released a 7-inch that was The Riot before, and Broadway Calls, was another band that ended up doing a lot in kind of the pop-punk genre. And I actually teamed up with a friend who runs a label called J10, and it was the first custom-made music release and the first of a label called J10. He was based in Virginia Beach at the time. He's now also in Richmond. And that started the label just from an encouragement of an old friend who knew my previous work from putting out records with other bands. And then I had always really wanted to focus on doing stuff in like those punk shoegaze kind of themes. So shortly after that, I teamed up with Screen Vinyl Image and Ceremony to do an LP. Also helped Black Knight Crash with their first album, and those came out in 2008. And then a little bit down the line from those, it just kept growing, and I kept doing more and more records, and now more than 10 years later, I'm still putting out records. Just did, I think, 7 new vinyl releases, and more cassettes than I can count. It's what I do every day. So I've been really excited to get to put out music for a living and work with all these awesome bands, and it's pretty much my life's work.
Right on. Oh, good job on that. Are you so you stick strictly to vinyl and tapes, right? You don't do any CDs?
I do. I've done a ton of CDs too.
Okay.
Yeah, it just kind of depends on what it calls for stuff.
I gotcha.
Yeah, sometimes CDs work well. I feel like CDs are something that it might not be like the main thing that people go to record stores to shop for anymore, but
yeah,
they still definitely have a part in our scene, and it's something that I feel like if you go to see a band play, you might be kind of captivated by that performance, and there are people who want to support the band that might not necessarily be interested in vinyl or CD or cassette.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh, well, I'll grab a CD, and even if they don't regularly shop for CDs anymore, it's kind of like a format that some people are still, buy to support bands when they keep them live, things like that. So.
Okay. Well, why don't you, before we talk about your own project, why don't you give us the best digital link whoever's listening right now can get to Custom Made Music?
No, the record label is custommademusicda.com, and then I also have a blog/music website that's more focused on reviews and featuring bands. That's custommademusicmag.com.
Okay.
So you can check out either of those, the record label and the blog/music magazine site.
Okay, and so after we talk to Dave here, we're going to hear from a band called Orations, This Blinding Light, Matt Kelly, and Cushing. Those are some of the tracks you sent me today, but I know I've been looking at the website. There's many other bands on there, so you'll get a taste of it on the radio. Okay, well let's talk about you now, Dave, because I've been following Custom Made Music, but I just thought I thought Dave put on shows, sold vinyl, and got great music out there, but apparently you're making your own music. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, Yeah, well, I've actually been part of the band Last Remaining Pinnacle for a long time.
Okay.
Which is actually a project I started in 1995. There was a record label in the 90s called Very Small Records that eventually became Too Many Records. Very Small kind of was run by David Hayes, who was the original partner of Lookout Records with Lawrence Livermore.
Okay.
And he'd been doing Very Small for a while, and he changed it to Too Many Records. And he put out a 100-band comp LP, and Last Remaining Pinnacle's first song, if you want to call it a song, was like a sound piece that I recorded. This 100-band comp, and that came out on Too Many Records in 90. I think it came out in 96. And then I did multiple compilation appearances and splits, and Last Remaining Pinnacle was always just me until maybe around 2010 I started collaborating with a few different people, and then in 2011 this gentleman, Dave Jambitsky, who is a good friend of mine, started playing guitar, and we started writing more rock and roll songs, kind of dark psychedelic, shoegaze, folk stuff, and we released 2 albums. The first one came out almost 7 years ago, and then we did another one in 2014. So Last Remaining Pinnacle was still a project and writing new material and still evolving. But last fall I started doing solo shows more regularly, just to kind of enjoy the spontaneity of being able to just record something whenever I had an idea, or if I wanted to pick up and play a show, or do a couple of things here and there in a live format that wasn't a full band. I could just grab a guitar or grab whatever kind of soundscape kind of pedals or atmospheric devices that I was using at the time, and just take off, and I could make the travel easier and the setup a little easier than traveling with the full band. It was just something that I felt at the moment I needed to do. And last fall I recorded a session in New York at a studio called New York Head, and a couple of songs came out of those sessions that are going to be released actually within the next week. So about when this airs, it'll actually be available at daveallisonva.bandcamp.com and available on this tour. So you'll be able to hear those recent recordings that I've been making, just under my name.
Okay. And that's great. And when does your tour start, and which direction are you going?
So I'll be at the Replay Lounge in Lawrence, Kansas on Thursday the 25th, and then I'll be in Wichita, Kansas at the White Lodge on the 27th. I will be at the Mini Bar in Kansas City on the 30th. St. Louis is on the 1st at the Way Out Bar, and then the 2nd is Nashville at Springwater Supper Club. And then there are some New York City dates that are to follow. If you visit the daveallisonva.bandcamp.com, they'll be up on that, so you can see what the New York City dates that are the following week. There's a few of those.
Excellent. So New York City, not that far away from Newfoundland, really. East Coast, another East Coaster. So yeah, we've been talking with Dave Allison about his music and his record label, Custom Made Music. So after the break, we're going to hear Dave Allison's music. And like I said, we're going to hear from Orations, This Blinding Light, Matt Kelly, and Cushing. So thanks a lot for coming on the show, Dave. And we hope you keep the music.
It.
No problem. All right, you're listening to Duel Citizen on CHMR 93.5 FM. Again, that was Dave Allison, Custom Made Music. So after the break, we are going to hear those artists. So just sit back and enjoy the shoegaze, the heavy shoegaze. It's really beautiful. So it'll go Dave Allison, Hologram Hotel, Orations, Receiver, This Blinding Light, Lays, Matt Kelly, Surpassing Fancy, and Cushing, Little Devil. So enjoy. And then after that break, it'll be Groundwire Community News. Thanks for tuning in to Duel Citizen.
Welcome to Groundwire Community Radio News, brought to you by contributors from community radio stations across Canada. This episode of Groundwire was produced at CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal, an unceded traditional Kainai territory. I'm your host, Will Anderson. On today's show, meth crisis in Winnipeg.
We're on pace to pick up 80,000 used syringes in our community.
Taking a deeper look at Quebec's Bill 21.
Just because it's not a big deal to you doesn't mean you get to impose your will.
And a read-in protest at Winnipeg Central Library.
It is intended to be welcoming to everyone and not just the wealthy few.
Stay tuned to Groundwire. Last month, the labor community in Winnipeg was rocked by news of injustice within its own ranks following the resignation of a prominent labor activist. This headline, including recorded audio, comes to us courtesy of CKUW's Emily Leadham, host of the program Rank and File Radio, the Prairie Edition.
On Tuesday, March 19th, 2019, Baja Sokol resigned as president of the Winnipeg Labour Council, citing bullying, harassment, and undemocratic behavior from men in labor leadership.
Let us just handle it, coming from a group of brothers. We've been doing this longer than you've been alive. And I'm not going to go much further after this one because it does get worse, but nice tits. We are the people in this room that fight against these injustices and that we fight to do better, but we're not when this is happening right here in our own walls.
After Baja's resignation, the Winnipeg Free Press obtained a letter written last year, in May 2018, signed by 6 unions and written on Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1505 stationery. It read, the ATU, along with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Local 856, Canadian Office and Professional Employees Union, Local 342, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 2085, Union of Health and Environment Workers, Local 50012, and Winnipeg Association of Public Service Officers wrote the Canadian Labour Congress asking it to investigate major issues at the Winnipeg Labour Council and, quote, perceived incidents of intimidation and harassment brought forward by members of CUPE. However, a formal investigation by the Canadian Labour Congress only started 2 days after Baja's resignation.
Listeners can find Basia Sokol's complete March 19th speech on the program's SoundCloud page, Rank and File Radio, Prairie Edition. Our next headline comes to us from Nick Lachance of CKUT on traditional unceded Kainai territory in Montreal.
Montreal cab drivers are protesting the government's plan to deregulate the taxi industry. This morning, convoys of taxi converged outside the Ministry of Transport offices on René Lévesque to call out what could be a devastating blow to their livelihood if this bill is passed. Under this proposed Bill 17, taxi permits would be abolished, which would both deregulate the industry and would threaten retirement plans of taxi drivers across the province who are planning on selling their permits, says George Busios, president of Champlain Taxi. This is grim news considering the hardship experienced by taxi drivers in recent years in the face of the fierce competition of other deregulated ride-hailing services. Though shocking, this bill and the lack of protection of Montreal cab drivers falls in line with the provincial government's racist track record.
The SNC-Lavalin affair continues to tarnish the highest levels of Canadian government. As of April 2nd, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who held the office of Attorney General until she refused to defer prosecution for Quebec construction giant SNC-Lavalin, was removed from the Liberal caucus by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, following the release of a phone call she received from Clerk of the Privy Council Michael Wernick, who has since resigned. Here's an excerpt.
No, but would not be if you decided to use some of these tools under the law. Because I think he feels the government has to have done everything it can before we lose 9,000 jobs in a signature Canadian firm.
Right. So, I'm confident in where I'm at, and my views on SNC and the DPA haven't changed. This is a constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence that, Michael, I have to say, including this conversation, previous conversations that I've had with the Prime Minister and many other people around it, it's entirely inappropriate.
Wilson-Raybould cites the call as evidence of the Office of the Prime Minister pressuring her to use a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, or DPA, to allow SNC-Lavalin to avoid punishment for charges related to bribing officials in the government of Tunisia. Other resignations so far include Principal Secretary Gerald Butts and President of the Treasury Board Jane Philpott, who has also been expelled from the Liberal caucus. The crystal meth crisis in Winnipeg is becoming more and more acute. Michael Welch of University of Winnipeg-based radio station CKUW brings us the following report on family members and street-level activists coming face-to-face with this blight on Winnipeg's most poverty-stricken neighborhoods.
Winnipeg's Bear Clan patrols are finding more discarded hypodermic needles lately as they make their daily rounds through the downtown core, a sure sign that the use of crystal methamphetamine is on the increase. James Favel is the founder and director of the group of volunteers, which has for the last few years been a visible presence and aid for vulnerable community members in Winnipeg's most poverty-stricken areas.
Last year, 40,000 syringes picked up off the streets. This year, we've already picked up 20,000 syringes. I mean, we're on pace to pick up 80,000 used syringes in our community. That shows a real spike in IV drug use in our community, and it's not a healthy thing.
My name is Amy Marie Patrick. I've been walking with the Bear Clan for just over a year. There's been lots of different scenarios that I myself have experienced, from young teens, young girls in suicidal psychosis states, to people coming off of meth and scraping crystals out of their face to re-smoke them. Assaults, people just getting assaulted.
Members of the Federal Standing Committee on Health had participated in a patrol at the invitation of James Favel and witnessed firsthand the toll the drug was taking on Winnipeg community members.
And it just so happens near the end of the patrol, we come across a young woman. It was probably -2. It was very cold, biting wind, and she was inappropriately attired. She just had a sleeveless T-shirt on, jeans, and she had a backpack on, and she was carrying 2 bags. And when I got to her hands were just so red they looked like they were already frostbitten. And that's one of the problems with methamphetamine is it really boggles the mind. They get hot when they take that drug, so they disrobe, and then the body doesn't, or the body knows when it's cold, so they can go into hyperthermia right away. And if she would have fallen asleep, she could have been gone. So luckily we got her warmed up, gave her some food, a couple care kits, and we got her to her destination safely. So those MPs had a chance to see that physically firsthand, and now they're taking that back to Ottawa.
Janelle Henry is an Indigenous community member and has a young adult son who is a user. She spoke about her ordeal during a panel discussion convened as part of the 17th Annual Winnipeg Aboriginal Film Festival.
I didn't know what to do. I tried asking a lot of people for help. We couldn't get it anywhere. Because of his drug addiction, he was paranoid and thinking everybody was after him. So he carried samurai swords. He carried all kinds of weapons on him. And thank goodness he never hurt anyone. But a lot of it was to do with self-defense, because he is a small guy. I'm not condoning that, but it was really hard to put him in jail. And he could have gotten 5 years. But we had to really talk to the judge, and the judge considered his age. He's only 22. The reason Josh tells me that he became addicted was because he lost my mom, which is my adopted mom, his grandma, who raised him. Because he went to her when he was 4 years old. That's who he bonded with. And she passed away a couple of years ago, and that was it for Josh. He was gone. And there was nothing I could do. I can't chase him around. Where he went, all these places he went to were very dangerous. I didn't know what a trap house was before, and now I know what it is. I thought it was just some word in a rap song, but I found out later through different stories from different people that are involved in the scene that when they go there, they get trapped there. That their shoes get taken, their jackets, their money, their cell phones, they lose everything. And then they're held in these houses. I mean, I'm sure they go in willingly, but they can't leave when they want.
I thought it was about 3 to 6 months that it would take to get somebody off of methamphetamine and get them back on the right track. It's more like 12 to 18 months, and that's a long period of time for somebody to be recovering from methamphetamine. There needs to be, adequate funding available to these people so they can afford to pay rent and eat healthy and live well, and not be subjected to the blinding poverty that got them in that place in the first place. Because if that's the case, they're going to go right back to what makes them feel most comfortable.
They're human beings too, despite what they're going through, despite what they're struggling with. They're human beings. They have feelings. and so as long as we can remember that and treat them that way, I think that, things can move forward in a positive way.
Listeners can find more information on crystal meth as well as resources for addicts and their families at the Addictions Foundation of Manitoba website at afm.mb.ca. To connect with Bear Clan Patrol, visit the group's Facebook page. From Winnipeg on occupied Anishinaabe-Gakin, the homeland of the Métis Nation and the historical territory of the Nahiawak and the Nakota, this is CKUW's Michael Welch for Groundwire.
We just heard Capel Valley, Saskatchewan by Buffy St. Murray. Legislation is on the table in the National Assembly of Quebec to ban certain public employees, such as teachers, from wearing religious symbols. Unsurprisingly, the law, called Bill 21, has become the subject of significant opposition because many perceive it to unfairly target Muslims who wear the hijab head covering. A discussion was held about Bill 21 on April 2nd by the McGill Muslim Law Students Association. Charles Taylor was one of the speakers. He had previously recommended a similar law in 2008 in his Bouchard-Taylor report, but after the Quebec City mosque shooting in 2017, he changed his position to advocate against any laws targeting religious symbols. On April 2nd, he said Bill 21 was pure discrimination.
Well, because if the instruments of the society, the state, is really neutral between religion and non-religion and between religions, then to set up a law in which people who practice certain religions can't get access to certain jobs, and people who don't practice those religions, other religion, no religion can, is a clear discrimination.
Also at the discussion was human rights lawyer Catherine McKenzie. She also spoke about how Bill 21 would have a discriminatory effect.
One of the arguments that gets levied is, oh, on est très différent ici à Québec. And of course that's true in some ways, but I didn't think it was true about sort of basic, inviolable things like the respect for people. And, one of my colleagues today, Olga Rydko, who I work with these cases on, said, if this law said no women are allowed to work in positions of authority, or black people are not allowed to work in positions of authority, or gay people are not allowed to work in positions of authority, would anybody say oh, no problem, you notwithstanded that? Whew, okay, problem's over, right? No. But somehow there's still an idea in this society, and the premier, said it on Sunday night, that for religion there's still an element of choice, that for religion it's okay if there are restrictions on where you get to practice your religion, and yeah, you can just do that at home, what's the big deal? Well, what are you talking about? It is a big deal to them. Just because it's not a big deal to you doesn't mean you get to impose your will.
McKenzie also focused on what she called the human effects of the bill and how it would immediately affect teachers and other public employees.
Well, if you are someone who wears a religious symbol, and I'm not limiting it to hijabs, niqabs, turbans, Sikhs, if you're a Catholic who wears a religious symbol, if you're a Protestant who wears a religious symbol, if you're Jewish and you wear a religious symbol, this affects everybody, right? If somebody was telling you that because of something that you could not change about yourself, there were just some things that were just not going to be available to you, because that's what this law is doing. That's not about the Constitution or, the notwithstanding clause. That's just a basic human fact. And I don't want the basic human consequences of this to get overlooked, because they're significant, they're severe, and this is not a compromise for the people it affects.
And now, to follow up on one of our headlines from the last edition of Groundwire. The Millennium Library, the central public library for the city of Winnipeg, has implemented strict security measures for those entering the library. Here's Winnipeg resident Ray Eskrit.
So about a month ago, the Millennium Library put in these massive barriers in the form of security checks where they go through every item in your bag, and then you also get an airport security-like metal detector wand waved over you and all of your possessions. And we feel that that is not only a massive barrier for a lot of people, in reality, the effect is quite a racist policy. And so we're here to make it known that this is not acceptable in a tax-funded institution, and especially one like a library where it is intended to be welcoming to everyone and not just the wealthy few.
Eskrit spoke at a read-in, a protest at the library organized in part by John Sampson. Here he is discussing how the community action came together.
We decided that we should do an action and realized that they had a advisory library board meeting today. So we thought we'd do a read-in and have people come down and read books and also write down ideas for a better library and post them and just have a nice community get-together to protest the new security measures at the library.
Many Winnipeg residents perceive the security measures to unfairly target marginalized groups and exclude them from the resources of the public library system. Ray Eskrit is one of them and explained why.
I think it's a huge barrier for people who live outdoors or are homeless and carry everything they own on them. So all of a sudden the knife that they use to not only open their food but eat it has become labeled a weapon, and they're not allowed entry into the library. There's also things like young women and other people who are menstruating who don't necessarily want to empty out their bag in front of everyone, including strange men. There's issues of people who are trying to hide items from abusive partners that maybe don't necessarily want to empty their bag in front of their partner. There are people with mobility differences who can't necessarily stand in line for 20 minutes while they're waiting to be searched. There are people in mobility devices like wheelchairs and have canes and things that can't be accurately assessed, and so they kind of get a weird treatment, and we just feel that that's totally unacceptable for all types of marginalized people.
The reasoning behind the new security measures has not been made completely clear, beyond the fact that there has been a reported uptick in incidents and threats in the library. John Sampson also discussed some of the strategies he believes the library should adopt in order to better serve the community while also providing a safe environment.
We'd like them to consider housing more social services in the library and taking a more kind of harm reduction approach to the downtown in general. And we'd like them to meet with community groups who have solutions for security. There are a lot of them in Winnipeg who are doing really remarkable things that don't involve intrusive security measures. So those are among the things that we're hoping that they'll do. But yeah, consulting with their community would be a big first step. But I think the very first thing, as an act of goodwill, and I think as an act of progress, they should take the security measures down.
Audio for this feature was acquired by Susan Hubert from CKUW in Winnipeg on occupied Anishinaabe-Gakin, the territory of the Nihiawak and the Nakota. For this edition's Community Radio Report, I had the opportunity to speak on the phone with Matthew Crozier, station manager of CKCU at Carleton University, about the Ford government's new Student Choice Initiative and the Student Services Blackout held at Carleton. I was wondering if you could tell me just from the start about what the Student Choice Initiative is and what the Ford government is doing about it.
I mean, obviously we have our own perspective, which would be different from the government, but somewhere in late January, they came out with the Student Choice Initiative, which I think is supposed to give students the opportunity to opt out of fees, which would involve what they call non-essential fees. In our case, the radio station. Other things at this university would include the newspaper, the student government for undergrads, the student government for graduate students, the theater group, OPERG. So a number of groups on campus who receive student fees. And the opt-out process will take place during admission. So after they have, in the process of paying for their fees, there will be buttons they can click to not fund those groups. At the same time, they made changes to OSAP, which also has an effect in that if you are getting an OSAP loan, then you will not be able to pay any of the non-essential fees unless you opt to pay them yourself. Now, if you're already getting a loan to go to school, you're unlikely to take on additional fees at that time.
Right.
So a lot of the fees, the majority of fees students are paying are considered essential. These include foot patrol, building maintenance fees, as well as athletics. So the vast majority of fees at Carleton University would be considered essential, and then a few of them are non-essential, which includes CKCU.
So first off, can you? I know you might not have an exact number, but can you give me an idea? How much money that students are going to be given the option to opt out of, and what kind of effect financially that would have on CKCU?
So there's $1,200 essentially in fees. Each student is slightly different depending on how many courses they're taking. But that's the basic amount, and then of that, $168 would be non-essential, which includes ourselves and then those other groups, the undergrads, the grad student associations, OPERG, the school newspaper, the Charlatan, and the theater group, Sock and Buskin. Individually, our fee is $14 and a little bit more than that. We don't know what the opt-out rate would be. There's examples of somewhat similar things taking place in Australia and New Zealand, which had very high opt-out rates, but they're not straight-out comparisons to what's going on here.
Okay. Now, so I know about the blackout that happened on April 3rd. Can you tell me a little bit about what went into the organization of it?
Yeah, so there's all of those groups I mentioned are running their own campaigns to draw awareness to students as well as to the public. But we're working together on campus as well. So the blackout day was to draw attention to these are groups that are affected, and you won't be able to have these kinds of services in the future without student fees. So for that day, they closed their doors. The affected groups closed their doors, put up blackout signs. They were still working behind the closed doors. They put up blackout signs on their websites and social media accounts. And in our case, we also ran radio ads throughout the day, letting people know what was going on campus and the different groups affected. And I hope it was a good program. It did get media attention, which is useful, and definitely got some students asking questions about on social media about different things. Can I go and use the gym, or can I use the pool type questions, and the library? And the answer to that is yes, you can use those. So I think it was a good way of trying to get attention on the campus, and I think it was cooked. It was the idea was brought up by people at Oberg and the Graduate Student Association at our meetings, and I think those were ingenious ideas about how to try to get a different way of getting the message out.
Okay, that's great. And are there any further initiatives planned to protest the Student Choice Initiative, or to do something about it in regard to CKCU?
It's a mixture of things. I think we're trying not to go with a full-out negative message. I'm not sure how well a negative message resonates with students. We're trying to remind people of the positive things we do. So we're in the process of planning a day of journalism workshops to take place later in April, with the School of Journalism here as the presenter, along with ourselves and the Charlotte in the School paper. There will be certainly mentions there that these programs would be greatly, the newspaper and the radio station do a lot of work with the School of Journalism,
right,
and that negative effects to either the newspaper and or the radio station will not be great for students in journalism. But the overall message there will be, here are things that we're doing on campus journalism, things to consider, and ways to build your skills that both these organizations offer. So the overall plan for that is to make it as positive as possible and not focus on the negative, but to let them know that, if you're coming back next year, you should opt into the fees for the newspaper and the radio station. And we have some other activities like that planned as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Matthew, and best of luck moving forward for CKCU.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay,
have a good day.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. That's it for this edition of Groundwire. I'm your host, Will Anderson. This episode was produced at CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal on unceded traditional Gananihaka territory. Stay tuned for the next edition of Groundwire in 2 weeks.